Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Prairie Food Forum and Soil Health Workshop. My name is Jessica Nadd. I am the Director of Great Plains Regeneration. We have a booth right up here that you can check out. So I am a nonprofit that focuses on soil health education, watershed regeneration, and new market development. And we're going to have a lot of folks on hand here giving you a little bit more input as to what we do. But we have been given the honorable task of introducing to you a company called Prairie Food, and that's the real reason why we're here today. So before we get started, we're going to kickstart with Dr. Trish Jackson with a keynote presentation, but I wanted to do the lineup of everybody who is here today. So some of our speakers that you're going to hear from is over here in the Soil Regen booth, we've got Russell Hetrick and Liz Haney, Lance Gunderson, Trish Jackson. We have a number of local producers that you can hear from and folks from all of our different sponsors, Regen Ag Lab, Kaufman Seed. We have the Kansas Soil Health Alliance. It's a new nonprofit that is focusing on education here in Kansas, so you should give them a little bit of your time today. Over here we have Prairie Food, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, Green Cover Seed, and then two other sponsors that we need to mention are Wise Up Food from Florida, and then we also have Better Fed Foods here for you today. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce to you Trish Jackson. And I didn't run this by her, but we do have a bio on Tricia. If you didn't already get one of your programs, there's one in the back. And here we go. So Dr. Trish Jackson hails from central Kansas, where she learned to value prairies and rural communities. Her educational and personal adventures took her around the world, where she admired diverse cultures, food, landscape, and agriculture. Through her graduate studies in soil science, environmental studies, and climatology, she came to understand how regenerative agricultural practices can build healthy soil to create a truly resilient community, brimming with nutrient-dense food, clean water, and plentiful wildlife. It is my honor to introduce to you today Dr. Trish Jackson with Prairie Food. Welcome.
Thank you all for joining us. This is an exciting day for Prairie Food, and I'm proud to be the one that gets to tell you about Prairie Food. So the mission for me today is to introduce you to the company, tell you a little bit about the product and how it works. But I want to start out today by thanking everyone that's come today, and those of you who have supported us in our journey. Thank you to Wise Up Food and Better Fed Foods for supporting us and being sponsors of this event, and our other vendors as well. We have gotten a lot of community support in Pratt through Pratt Community College. Thank you so much. They actually let us do some greenhouse research that was crucial in some of our findings that I'll be sharing with you today. The community, the chamber, the city of Pratt, and some of the officials that attended the ribbon cutting. It was very well attended by people in the community, as well as state officials and even federal representation. So thank you so much for all of your support today and for being here. I want to start out by talking about aha moments. A lot of us that are on the Prairie Food team have had aha moments, if not on a daily basis, frequently. And so this picture right here, Mike will be surprised to see it's my title slide. This was a day that he had an aha moment. He joined the team and he just wanted to be convinced. And he wanted to see for himself what was the impact of Prairie Food. And I think that everyone here probably shares that same notion. Show me the results that you're seeing, convince me. And so when he walked out in the field that day and he saw to the row where Prairie Food had been applied and where it hadn't been applied, that was the beginning of the aha moment. And then when he did the root dig, of course, any good soil scientist or agronomist would want to look at what's happening in the soil. That was huge. So you can see in this slide where we had Prairie Food, the soil was alive, and the plant responded to that. So that's really what Prairie Food is and what it does. It's a carbon-rich soil amendment that feeds the soil. And when you do that, you catalyze that process, that communication that's supposed to happen between the soil and the plant. So the plant's able to grow. So we don't feed plants. We feed the soil with Prairie Food. So let me tell you a little bit about the company Prairie Food. Our product is called Prairie Food, along with our company. Robert Harrington should be here. He's our CEO. He gave an amazing speech this morning at the ribbon cutting, and he mentioned how Prairie Food is a 3P company, or a triple P company. You might have heard it called that before. We didn't invent this notion, but it's something that defines the way that we do business. And it's the idea that we value people, planet, and profit. So to give you a little story about Prairie Food, I want to tell you about the people of Prairie Food. We really value the employees of Prairie Food, but Prairie Food also really wants to help farmers and the communities that we live in. So let me tell you a little bit about the people of Prairie Food first. So these are our 3 co-founders, Curtis Crawford, Robert Harrington, and Griffin Roberts. Curtis couldn't be here with us today, but Rob is here. Where are you, Rob? He's here. And then Griffin, where are you, Griffin? So these guys are here today. Robert is our CEO, and Griffin is our Chief Technology Officer. Curtis and Rob have known each other for a long time, and they've done lots of business ventures together. So that was a clear team. And then Rob and Griffin met each other when Rob was giving a presentation at KU. Griffin was a PhD candidate at KU at the time, and Rob gave this amazing presentation about how you can convert waste biomass into energy. But what was special about that presentation that really caught Griffin's eye was that it had this really good business model that made sense to him. It was the first time he had seen something that made sense. The idea makes sense, right? Converting waste into energy, that makes sense. But if you can't do it in a cost-effective manner, you can't get anywhere. So they got together, and the first thing that Rob did was take Griffin out to western Kansas where there's mountains of manure, okay? Lots of potential here. So that's Griffin. And Rob said, Griff, go pick out some stuff you like, okay? So that's a pretty big job to choose from that. Another key person in this story is pictured here. I will reveal his identity shortly. Some of you might recognize this. He was there that day, didn't want that in the back of his pickup truck. But he's really important to the story of how Prairie Food became the company that it is today. So fast forward a couple of months, here's Griffin and Curtis picking out some pristine turds for their batch test, okay? This is part of the business that we're in. And then Griffin had to mix that up with some water, which is, also part of the story as well. Well, Rob had acquired some space at KU in order to run a batch test, because we have some proprietary technology that allows us to transform biomass into something useful. So Griffin was in there. He told me last night it was his birthday. He was running this test, and he needed to release the pressure, and it was just a bath of Prairie Food. So it took him 3 days to clean up the KU lab, but we moved forward. So here's the person. Here's the mysterious person. Do you recognize him? He's one of the 50th people to know in Kansas. So if you don't know him, you should find him and meet him today. His name's Dave Brin. And when I was first introduced to Prairie Food, I found him on the website, and his title was Wise Advisor. Have you ever heard of that? I mean, it perfectly fits Dave. Well, Griff and Rob showed Dave the test results on some of those batch runs of this material they were making. So at the time, remember, they were trying to make terrestrial coal or some kind of energy product that you could make out of waste biomass. And Dave says to Rob, why would you want to burn that? That should go on the soil. And that was a complete pivot for Prairie Food from an energy company to something that could really transform agriculture. Why is that? So why can Prairie Food transform agriculture? And why is it so linked in with energy as well? Well, it's because it's all about carbon. Prairie Food and our technology transforms biomass into a microcarbon-rich slurry. And that carbon is the basis of all life. And so when you get that down on the ground, all of a sudden, what happens? The biology has a buffet, and within seconds, it starts eating. In agriculture today, we have, in the past decades, we've focused on the physical and the chemical aspects of soil. And what's been missing is the biology. Soil's alive. And what does it eat? It likes carbon. It likes to eat carbon. And so as soon as you start feeding the biology these microcarbons, it starts to grow and reproduce. And all of a sudden, it's recovering and healing, and that communication between the soil and the plant is repaired. And when that happens, the plant responds. You saw the picture of the roots. The plant grows more, it pulls more carbon out of the atmosphere, and it flushes at least half of that carbon back down into the roots to feed the soil. Did you hear me? Half of what the plant is doing is feeding the soil biology, because the soil releases nutrients to the plant. It's this wonderful, virtuous cycle that nature has designed over billions of years. And so by repairing that communication between the plant and the soil, all of a sudden we get these free services from nature. The plant's happy, the soil's functioning as it was meant to do. So carbon is the key to that, and that's what Prairie Food's made of. So the guys, Dave says, yes, let's try putting that on the ground. And so they did. So thank you, Kaufman Seeds, for being a research partner all this time with us. Kaufman allowed us to put some Prairie Food down on some of their seed plots. So they had seed plots going this way, and we put Prairie Food going the opposite way. Can you see the difference? When that crop came up, so across here, that was where the Prairie Food was. Well, that lit us up. We knew we were onto something. What we thought was going to happen really did happen, and it was more than we had dreamed. So we had really activated that soil. So that fall, we said, we better start making more Prairie Food because we need to get it out there and get it on the ground and see what happens. Maybe that was a fluke. It wasn't a fluke, I can tell you right now. So here we have John Schroth wearing, he's smart. He covered himself up with a suit so that he wouldn't get the bath. And we also have Chan Mazur there, who was our first agronomist to come onto the team. So we started making Prairie Food enough to put it out in totes and get strip trials done all over Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado. And that's me, actually. That was my first task with Prairie Food. They said, Trish, you and Chan organize this, get the shipments out. If you help us, we promise you'll get to analyze some soil test results. Well, that was enticing. That's my favorite thing to do. And so, boy, howdy, did I get to do that. I don't expect you to read all this. These are some of our summary reports. We have that information at our booth if you're interested in it. But the bottom line is we had really good results. If you add carbon to the soil, never are you going to have anything bad happen, okay? So what we saw was an increase in soil organic matter, an increase in microbial activity, and an increase in yield. That should make sense if you understand how the soil works, okay? If you are enhancing that soil-plant communication, the plant's growing more and it's flushing more of that carbon down into the soil. So of course we're gonna build soil organic matter. What's happening when you feed the soil? You get more microbial activity. So this is all things that we were wowed by, but it really makes sense. We shouldn't have been so surprised. And then when the plant grows and is healthier, you get not only more yields, but higher quality plants and yields as well. So it was all very good. So guess what? We need to make more prairie food. So this is our crew last winter. This is actually my husband, Bobby Jackson, my brother, Scott Toady. We have Jason Taylor, John Schroth, Gary Feiner there. There was others, many others that helped us through this. But this is a core group, and they are very dirty, and this is how Bobby came home every night. He would take off that blue thing and leave it in his truck. Thank you, Bobby, for doing that. But we needed to make more prairie food so that we could start selling it. People wanted it now. We had these amazing results. We needed to get more prairie food out on more fields. And that's exactly what we did. And so our tanker truck's sitting outside here, but we started selling tanker loads of prairie food. And this is our first successful pivot injection. So prairie food can go down on the ground in the same ways that farmers put other inputs down on the ground. It can go through the pivot, through the sprayer. And so this field also is a little bit infamous. It's famous and infamous, depending on who you ask. But the owner of this land is here today. And what we did here was increase the soil organic matter 2.5% we measured it in March of 2020 and again in March of 2021. And when we say that, we get a lot of, no way, that can't be. But it happened. And the reason why that happened is because not only did she decide to use prairie food, but she also used several regenerative agricultural techniques. And I'm going to tell you about some of those today. But when you couple these soil health practices and at the same time you're getting things fired up with prairie food, good things happen. Okay, so I told you a little bit about the people and the background story of Prairie Food, how we got to where we are today. I want to talk about the planet now. Now, it's really still a conversation about people because everything that we do to the planet is affecting the health of people. And so there's still that relationship there. You should recognize this. I mean, it is labeled, so we have that going for us. But that's a lot of our nutrients that are washing down the Mississippi and ending up in the Gulf of Mexico where it's causing a problem. Wouldn't it be better if we could keep those nutrients on the soil, in the soil, doing what we need them to do? So the way that we're farming right now is creating some issues with our water supplies, with soil contamination, with a dead zone in the Gulf. So the health of the people on the planet is really intertwined. And one of those things that impacts us in our daily life is that everybody eats, right? Yeah? Well, the quality of our food has declined. There was this seminal study that came out in about 2000 that looked at the nutrient density of food in 1950 compared to 1999, and there was a huge decline in the nutrient value of that food. So you have to eat 2 salads today to get the same nutrition that you got in 1950 eating 1 salad. That's a pretty big problem. It's a health consequence. Disease associated with ag chemicals has increased. I don't think I need to say anything more about that. Everybody's aware of that. One thing you may not be aware of, though, is that we have a pretty high death rate associated with poor air quality in agricultural settings. So this is not just breathing fumes. There's a lot more to it than that, and it's a huge cost on our society. You've heard of this one before. How about polluted water causing things like blue baby syndrome? You know, these are things that we really need to address. And one that you may not think about all the time is loss of habitat and our ability to use the resources for things that we enjoy. How many of you have gone to a river or a lake and not been able to swim in it, not been able to get into it because it was polluted, or not be able to keep the fish and eat it? Why do we need to live that way? So those examples are really something that you can kind of pinpoint to local, state, or federal issues, such as the water quality issue, take a step back. Everybody's heard about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The atmospheric scientists tell us we have 38 gigatons of extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere right now. So if you look at all the technology we have, one of the most promising ones is called direct air capture. Have you heard of this? Bill Gates is actually a funder of this research. Essentially, you can see the image here. We're sucking air out of the atmosphere, putting it through this process, and pulling the carbon out, and it turns into little carbonate pellets. Well, that's expensive. So to build one of these plants, it costs $3 billion. It costs $100 to $600 per metric ton of carbon dioxide, every metric ton. And each one of these plants only takes out about 1 million metric tons. That sounds like a lot, but if you know the difference between a metric ton and gigatons, which is our problem, then you know that this is not very feasible. So I calculated you'd have to have 380 plants running for a year to do that, and they're very energy intensive. One study I read in preparation for today said that it would take 114% of our available energy just to run these plants. Okay, does that make sense? Not so much. So what's an alternative? It's clear. This is a map of farmland, farmable land all over the earth. It's that bright green color. There's billions of acres of farmable land on earth. Depending on how you define that, the number might shift a little bit here or there. But everyone agrees there's billions of acres of farmable land. What if we were able to increase the soil organic matter by 1% of all those acres? Okay? What would happen? How much carbon is that? Well, I think it was actually Griffin that did this calculation, and it was 181 gigatons. How much was the problem? It was 38. So if we did this on all the soil of the earth, that's 5 times what we need. And it could be done pretty rapidly. So how much does it cost? Well, guess what? Nature works for free. So by changing the way we farm, we can solve this problem in a short time frame without a lot of cost. And guess what? There's all these other side benefits to that, right? How about more nutritious food, everyone? So by partnering with Mother Nature, we solve a lot of problems. So I couldn't resist. I had to use this quote: "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." I think it was Jeff that referred to the idea of how hard on us it was as a country to go through the Dust Bowl. We're still dealing with the ramifications of that almost 100 years later. And so we need to reverse this trend and start taking care of our soil so that our country can thrive. One of the ways that we can do that is through regenerative agriculture. Honestly, it's the way to do it, people. What does the word regenerative mean? If you've never heard of regenerative agriculture, surely you've heard this word. It means healing, restoring, bringing something back to the way it was supposed to function. And that's exactly what we're talking about. If you've heard of sustainable agriculture, that's sustaining some kind of status quo. We don't want to do that. We need to heal the soil so it's functioning and performing these services for us. And so I would argue that we need to regenerate the soil with agriculture. So this paradigm shift is really tough for some people. You know, a lot of us were brought up in a time where we were fighting with nature, and we wanted to win, and we would do a lot of things in order to make that a reality. But that's hard, and we're losing. And so I would argue we need to shift into a partnering with nature frame of mind. You know, Mother Nature's been doing this for billions of years. She's figured out the best ways to go about things. So if we could learn from that and capture and partner with her, all of a sudden now that makes us look a lot smarter, right? And the next one is disturb soil. That's something that we've been doing a lot of. So if you disturb the soil, you're disturbing the soil function. If you start restoring the soil and helping the soil do what it does best, what it's designed to do, all of a sudden, things start getting easier for you. And we're going to hear from Russell, and he's going to tell us all about his story of how he came through this realization. Monoculture versus diversity. Just look outside. Mother Nature doesn't like bare ground. Mother Nature doesn't like monoculture. So just put yourself in the shoes of the microbe for a second. Would you like to only eat one thing, one food? Do you think you'd be healthy if you just subsisted on a diet of ice cream? No, it's not a good way. It's not a healthy way to live. And so just like us, nature thrives with diversity. Reductionist versus holistic. So this is a mindset. Reductionist is really just looking at one narrow slice of the problem and trying to attack it with one specific tool. Let's say you have an insect attacking a plant. You're like, I need that one chemical to fix that, to kill that insect. What happens all of a sudden now, if you take a step back and you say, why is my plant being attacked in the first place? It's a completely different way of thinking. And you're going to hear all kinds of examples of this throughout today and then at the workshop tomorrow. So there's 5 core principles of regenerative agriculture. You'll hear all about these. So I'm not going to go into depth on these. If you haven't heard of regenerative agriculture, you're going to think, well, that makes sense. Why didn't I think of that? It's one of those things that's simple and it makes sense. So the first one is to minimize soil disturbance. Nobody's saying you can never plow again. We're just saying if you want your soil to function the way that you need it to, maybe you should back off a little bit and let it do its job. The next one is maximize crop diversity. I touched on the details of that already. That could be done through things like crop rotations or cover crops. Keep the soil covered. In the wintertime, do you like to sleep without a blanket? It makes sense to keep that soil covered because it keeps those microbes alive. You need to think about the soil as being alive. Maintain a living root year-round. So this is a huge one. You see a lot of fields that are just fallow all winter long. If you're a microbe again, think of yourself as a microbe, please. Would you like to starve for 3 months? I mean, you're going to go into starvation mode and eat whatever's there, and it's going to be your organic matter that's in that soil. And so if you keep a living root in the soil, that plant, whenever it can, it's photosynthesizing, and remember, it's flushing carbon into the soil. It's feeding the soil biology, so when spring hits, that soil's ready to go. It's a lot more resilient. And then that last one is integrating livestock. Livestock are Mother Nature's, processors of biomass into energy that can be used by the soil. And so it's a wonderful way, if you can find a way to do that, to integrate livestock. So notice that this has 3 key outcomes on it. Improving soil health, that's pretty clear. Fostering biodiversity, we've covered that. But what about that third one? Wouldn't you like it if you still got a great yield in a drought year? Think about the resilience economically that you'll experience if your soil can take a hit and still produce. It's a huge argument for going ahead and taking the first step towards a regenerative system. So if that doesn't convince you, the Rodale Institute has done a 40-year study looking side by side at conventional agriculture and more regenerative systems. So they call it, there's conservation, organic, sometimes it can be regenerative, but basically they're using regenerative systems next to conventional systems that uses, regular tillage, the chemicals and that sort of thing that a lot of us are familiar with. So what did they find in this comparison after 40 years? Well, the first one is that regenerative systems are competitive with conventional yields after a 5-year transition period. Well, guess what? We figured out a way that you don't have to go through that 5-year transition period and have a yield bump. No yield dip when you use Prairie Food and regenerative practices. Produce yields up to 40% higher in times of drought. That's that resiliency I was talking about. You still get to have a nice, healthy paycheck at the end of the season, even in times of drought. 3 to 6 times greater profits for farmers. So we will hear from experts in this area. When you differentiate yourself by producing really healthy food, then you can participate in new markets that are really looking for that. So we'll hear from Bernie Hansen. We'll hear from Bill. Bill, are you here? Will you guys raise your hands? Bill O'Neill. And we'll hear from Rob Harrington, our CEO, about reimagining ag and thinking about these new ways of making a profit. How about not poisoning yourself or your children or the community? Leach no toxic chemicals in the waterways. We can feel good about that. Using less energy. This is a big problem right now. Energy prices are soaring. And then fewer carbon emissions. How about, let's just say, all of a sudden your farm is a carbon sink. Don't even need to worry about emissions. Okay, so that was really kind of the planet talk. All right, I want to talk about profits now. Everybody can get on board with that. Everybody eats and everybody cares about money. Yeah? Okay, so Prairie Food, of course, wants to be profitable as a company, but in order to do that, we really need everyone else to be profitable. And that's all the way through that entire supply line, from the farmers that do the work all the way through. So I really liked this recent study from the Soil Health Institute that came out this year. And what they did was they talked to 100 farmers that had already been using soil health principles on their farm to see how it was going. What's the cost to benefit ratio here? How are things going? Well, 85% of those farmers saw more profitability on a per acre basis on their farm when they're farming corn. Now, I have to point that out. Dollars per acre. A lot of farmers today farm for a yield goal. What if all of a sudden you don't worry about the yield as much as you worry about what is your profit per acre? Farm for the bottom line rather than for this idea of a yield goal. And so look at this. There's a huge spread here from not doing well, right, all the way up to something like $175 extra per acre that these guys are making. Again, we're going to hear from Russell on how he does it. But one of the special things about Soil Regen is that they help farmers make those decisions so that they can be profitable in this transition to regenerative farming. So we're really pleased to be partnering with them. How about soybeans? Does anybody grow beans? 88% of these farmers saw increase in profitability on their farm with beans. So when you couple together Prairie Food that gets that soil moving in the right direction, healing that soil, restoring its functionality, and then on top of that, you use these soil health principles that allows all that progress that you're making with Prairie Food to be accelerated, you see a lot of benefits that occur. So you're saving. So remember, carbon is a huge sponge. So that top line is big for a lot of people. When you increase your soil organic matter 1%, all of a sudden you can capture an extra inch of rain when it falls. And then it's stored for later use. And that can be the difference between life and death in your crop. We're also improving nutrient use efficiency. And so that's that idea that if you're putting nitrogen down and you have a functioning soil, all of a sudden what you get out of that input is more valuable to you. You get more yields out of it. Higher yields, higher water holding capacity. That is that idea of storage of water. Better crop quality. And then this last one's huge, resiliency. There's so many stresses that you can't prepare for really, or you don't know what's coming, I should say. You can prepare for it because you can create resiliency in your soil health system. Okay, so I'm wrapping things up. Ways to get started. If you're interested in making a step towards a regenerative ag principle, here's what you do. Attend a workshop. Good job. You did that one already. Thank you. Number 2, farm for that bottom line. So change the way you're thinking about your farm. And again, tomorrow in our soil health workshop, we'll have a lot more hands-on actual techniques, answering questions, really hands-on kind of knowledge getting tomorrow. So come if you're interested in that. Learn how to build soil health, and that's also part of today and tomorrow. And so if you were to ask me, what's the first step actually really? And I would say start with the biology. Find a way to build a microbial army and put those guys to work for you. It's free. It's free to get those guys to work for you. But a fast way to do it is to feed them. And that's what Prairie Food is. It's food for the soil. It's going to get you started within seconds of it getting on the ground. So here's my funny little cartoon of microbes drinking an energy drink that is carbon. But your microbes are going to thrive. They're there already. You don't need to add more. They're everywhere. And so if you feed them, they're going to bounce back and you're going to get that biology working for you. So here's some results that are just very convincing in my mind. So this is in western Kansas in a dryland cornfield this summer. We had these pictures are just 40 rows apart. We had an area where Prairie Food was put down, and on the left there was no Prairie Food. And so within one growing season, we were able to get that soil functioning well enough, get that carbon sponge in place so that the rain that did fall in this dryland situation soaked up enough water to get this corn through. Where that was not happening, you can see what happened. Here's another one. So the Prairie Food was put down in October of last year, and with a triticale crop in western Kansas. This is irrigated. And then, if you remember this winter, we had a killing frost. You remember that killing frost, guys? This field had also been overgrazed. So when we went back in April to look at it, the Prairie Food side was recovering from those stresses, and the other side looked pretty bad. So this is a satellite image that shows biomass, and you can see to the line where Prairie Food was applied. Here's some pictures. This first picture was not that long after we put Prairie Food down, and you see on the right side, the roots are already starting to respond to that healthier soil, that conversation that should be happening between the soil and the plant. So the plants were already hardier at that point. And then when I visited the field in April, it was visible. You don't need a satellite to see that. You can see the clear difference there where we had Prairie Food down. And there it is, recovering. So the farmer was very happy with the Prairie Food side, and of course bought a lot more Prairie Food for his other crops. Okay, so what are you going to hear about today? I want to tell you about that as I'm finishing here. You're going to hear from Russell, how he awakened to this idea of soil health and saw that it was the only way. We're going to hear from other farmers, so you'll get to ask questions and hear about what they've done and to restore their soils. New profit opportunities, I mentioned that one. Also, we'll have Candy Thomas here with the NRCS, and she'll be doing some soil health demos so you can see it with your own eyes today and tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll hear more about case studies, so farmers that have used Prairie Food and what has been their experience. We'll hear from Lance Gunderson. Lance has been a wonderful partner with us as well. We send all of our soil samples and plant tissue samples to Lance for analysis, and he's an expert on that soil biology and understanding how we can measure that and then respond to it with decision making, along with soil regen. So we'll hear from Lance directly, and he's also going to feed us barbecue tomorrow. Thank you for that, Lance. Okay, well, thank you tomorrow. And then Russell will be talking tomorrow about that systems approach to soil health. So that idea of that holistic, taking a step back, looking at what's going on and making decisions based on that systems approach. So let me leave you with this quote. Know the difference between those who stay to feed the soil and those who come to grab the fruit. We've been grabbing the fruit for decades, and our country is declining in its ability to deal with stresses and feed nutritious food to our population. So let's take a moment and start feeding the soil so we can get all those good things back. Thank you.